adjustment that we're seeing is it's for marketers especially is it's going from the promise of growth into the proof of growth.
Yeah, that's good. Oh, maybe we should make that should be the podcast name, Harsh. But it's got to have Flameout in it. So somehow work that in. But otherwise, that's good. Wing It Podcast, goosedigital.com, episode 76, depending on when these two are cut up and put out there. Who do we have?
Chris O'Neill.
Robin Kroll.
Kevin Butler.
Michael Turksani. All right. Wing It Podcast, Collision Edition. Collision 2022. What's the official name of Collision?
Collision.
It's just Collision? It's not
just
like
Collision.
Collision, a digital marketing podcast?
No,
Or
that could be Collision, a digital marketing podcast.
Collision.
But the big event was just Collision.
Okay, how many people?
35,000.
35,000 people.
Wow. It's a big event.
Any COVID there? We don't know.
We don't know.
So they're testing the wastewater coming out of Collision just to double check it, but so far so good.
This podcast is a collision for me back into podcasting. It's been like a month and a half since I did one. So I'm going to apologize.
Well, think about 35,000 people after 2 years of almost no. If you don't count Vegas, there wasn't too many events taking place.
Actually, if we can talk about events for a moment, I had it way wrong when in the sort of the work from home sort of era. I kind of felt like, will people be really apprehensive about going back to events and people being uncomfortable? What I've sort of gathered in whether it's company user conferences or some of these big scale events and trade shows, is people are really enthusiastic about going and having in-person experiences, and to a point where it's almost the total opposite of what I thought. It's like people are really going harder at those things than we saw back in 2019 or early 2020. Yeah. People are they're jumping to get back out in front of people.
Pent up demand, right? So. And understanding that connection that you're having. So at a big trade show, when you're walking out to somebody's booth, you're waiting for a presenter, you're sitting next to somebody, and the ability to just turn to them and say, hey, how are you? Where are you from? What are you doing here? What do you... How can you replace that?
People were shaking hands again. Did you notice that?
People were shaking hands, and people were.
We didn't know that was going to be a
close
thing.
talking, and
close. I was at a banquet recently, and we were just at the buffet.
Oh, at a buffet.
Everybody grabbing from the same spoon. No problem.
I feel as if we might frighten people if we talk about the buffet.
Yeah. So
the marketing buffet is
what
over.
About we're going to get into what we're talking about. But if you were, I guess, close to graduating, so let's say and then like Collision was your first, let's say it was you're tech, you're in marketing, you're in tech or whatever. So you had 2 years of nothing, but you were probably a little bit let's say you didn't really do conferences, right? So under normal conditions, you're going through university or you're finishing up your college. You're probably hitting the odd one. I mean, even DX3 and some of these ones were free to students. You could literally just go and walk around and get a sense. Now all of a sudden it's been 2 years, and you're showing up as like, there's been nothing through my. It's kind of weird when you think about it. There's a bit of a gap there probably for some people.
I'm sure. I mean, I was a little jealous when I saw that Robin was there because I was not invited.
No,
but anyway, I vicariously was enjoying the shots because it's been too long, and having those opportunities to speak with people who have been working on stuff for 2 years, some really cool stuff, all that AI stuff that they're working on to create efficiencies. I'm behind. I'm behind by 2 years plus, because these last 2 years I think have been a real. There's been a real jump in terms of the tech that's been in development. So I feel behind. I feel behind.
You were behind already.
I was a little bit behind already.
Now you're not catching up.
But there's a further integration of tech with every other industry.
Absolutely. Like those are some of the things that stood out. We were talking a little bit about the med tech and health tech. where there was so education,
like pandemic driven.
Exactly, things that were driven through the pandemic through necessities, and some worked better than the other, but now are being fine tuned and understanding. Oh, there's great opportunities for growth. Think of all these people who have seen all these problems and challenges the last 2 years, and thinking all these startups that have found these and are working on problems. And then one of the things they were talking about is, why was the conference so well attended? Well, it's the whole post-pandemic, but then there's what's going on in the markets right now, that a lot of companies are in a position saying, wait a sec, things are actually a little bit difficult now. We're looking for some answers. And then we were talking about some of the sessions where they were standing room only, because people are starting to look for answers because they've had to make changes or cut down in their businesses. So,
so this is what we're talking about today.
Yeah, exactly.
And maybe like as a small preamble to that, I think there's two reasons why you're seeing some of this. There's the sort of further maturation or integration of tech into some of these, like healthcare and education are the really big ones to me. And part of that's driven out of the pandemic because we've seen all kinds of gaps in this great experiment called work from home or learn from home. But the other one is when you look at big tech in the last decade, they've kind of tackled the easy spots already. And when you look at where Google, Apple, Microsoft, all the big guns are going to go, where is like a big enough addressable audience and market they can go and meaningfully continue to grow at the pace and scale that they have? And it's really those big ones, whether it's like automotive, healthcare, education. There's only so many of those industries that are big enough to justify their efforts and resources. And I think that's why you're seeing, even on like the smaller startup scale, that's where they're going too, because that's really where the next round of movement is. And those are the ones best positioned.
Yeah, they can get plucked.
But the big guys are the ones best positioned to either invest all of their capital they've got waiting on the sidelines, be it the pluckings of acquisitions or even their own investments they make elsewhere into those spaces. But it's going to get tough for the smaller, lesser funded organizations to meaningfully dent now, and that's part of what sets up this podcast topic.
Yeah. Well, we want to talk about when cash is tight, which is now
starting to happen.
Seeing the layoffs, right? Unfortunate, like pretty, depending on where you look. And I don't think it's only tech, but I think maybe tech had driven some of these, expectations that we're going to talk about. So, when we were in the pandemic more so, and certainly before we had this economic kind of downturn, everyone that we spoke to was like, yeah, we're hiring, we're staffing up, we're adding marketing resources. And I know we've looked at some of those organizations and said that's quite a bit of money you've raised. And, are you getting the sales traction? Like you're certainly churning through the dollars. So I think that has set up a series of things. One of which is that what we're going to talk about today, which is the marketing organization maybe hasn't been as not I don't want to say accountable, because they probably had to look at metrics, and we're going to talk about sort of metrics that matter, but they've been kind of led down a path of, hey, you can spend a certain amount of money, that's okay. I think you were saying, Robin, like most of these organizations were on like quarterly kind of cash raises, so they were
so they have this expected infusion of cash on a regular basis.
Sure.
And especially with VC funded companies, that cash infusion is going to be slowing down. So it means you have to watch your burn rate, but you also have to be more careful about how you are you're spending that money, and you're going to be more accountable, because your investors whether it's outside investors or your board or your senior leadership, are going to be coming back and saying, well, I want to understand better what's the value that this investment is actually driving.
It's not the last 2 years. This has been going on for a while. We've seen the explosion of tech, this industry, for the better part of like
a decade, really.
Yeah, close to and I would kind of say really accelerated maybe in the last 7 years. So when you look at the marketers that are coming out of that era, right, of maybe being in VC-backed organizations and, having money to play with and having these valuations put on their company. And some of them have grown and some of them done quite well, but a lot of them, as we know, burning money, even though they have been growing. Some of them maybe not even growing as much as they need to be growing. And now we're seeing mergers, we're seeing, that kind of thing happen and layoffs. I just think there's definitely something around a set of marketing people that maybe have to reset their expectations on what performance actually means in marketing, right?
I think the adjustment that we're seeing is it's for marketers especially is it's going from the promise of growth into the proof of growth.
Yeah, that's good. Oh, maybe we should make that should be the podcast name, Harsh. But it's got to have Flameout in it, so somehow work that in. But otherwise, that's good.
But things spent 10, maybe even 12 years getting rather frothy with a small interruption, a blip in March of 2020, and then things got even wilder in that V-shaped recovery, whatever it's the K-shaped recovery, whatever we called it. And then now it's sort of it's coming back down to earth a little bit, where perhaps that party's tapering off a little, and then the accountability, Robin, to your point, is now starting to come to the forefront. And rather than the growth at all costs, it's more like sustained or more measured growth.
It's interesting because we've talked about these things all throughout the last, I don't know how long we've been doing this podcast or how long we've been at this, been together, Goose, talking about this, talking about, marketing, being really strategic about how they or where and how they're going to acquire leads, and being able to track and measure, including all the way through, what am I willing to spend on a lead? And then the whole marketing and sales function of working together, because, well, it's great the marketing can drive those leads, but if sales doesn't feel that they're good quality leads and they can't go ahead and close them, that last piece of the revenue, well, you're missing the bottom line.
I just think, so we have a really interesting vantage point because we have, some of our clients have more modest budgets and they've never really been operating with huge budgets and major backing to try and experiment or even be a bit wild with things. And we have some other clients who have some significant budget to play with and do bigger things. One of the things that I keep thinking, I can't shake this thought, someone's going to have to, smack it out of me, is a lot of these companies in the last 2 years that we've seen these wild raises from, and we've all read the press releases and we've talked to some of the individuals, I never understood why they anticipated so much more growth. Like, the addressable markets didn't really grow in a lot of cases. And in almost every vertical or industry, there was already top dog, big time established players that you're effectively saying we can either compete with or disrupt. I just don't think every single new company with some backing is going to be a disruptor. Usually there's a few and they're really impressive, but there aren't that many. So it kind of feels like a bit of a calling now where most of us are sitting here thinking this isn't overly much of a surprise. And that's the one thing that just always stood out to me. Then we've seen some layoffs, whether it's in Toronto tech, with the Wealthsimple one was a real eye-opener, a really transparent note from the CEO too. But it was sort of like, and more of this is probably going to happen because of this froth that we've been seeing.
The lead, when you think about even what we've noticed in marketing in general, how we went from this sort of world where measuring just one item like MQL growth, and that was what a lot of marketing organizations were really measured on. And then realizing, I think, like over the last, I would say 18 months, there's been a real sort of redirection of attention given to more development of the revenue. So more sort of connecting the marketing to revenue. And then I think that this is almost like, I'm not saying this is the final chapter, but I think the bubble of venture capital, kind of like the era of that sort of like spend, we are going toward one of two sort of end games, either acquisition or going public, which is like that sort of ultimate sort of like, place where you get the biggest bang. That's sort of where you were going. But in order to get there, you needed that ongoing sort of funnel of money. Like you needed to have access to that almost unending sort of, you know, where
But what you needed was you needed the growth story. Forget the sort of the profitability side of it for a moment. If you were going to go an IPO, it's sort of what I was saying before. You need that promise of growth or an ability to grow kind of at all costs, but something that says you found a way to bring in new customers, to generate revenue. And we think if we raise more, we can throw gas on that fire. I think now we're moving into more of a, whether it's more sustainable way to do it, but it's something a bit more connected to your point, where it's, okay, what does this really look like? And can you do this in a more, I don't know, responsible level?
So I guess what I'm saying is that it was almost like we got to this place where the money was coming before the proof.
Sure.
So the money was
Absolutely.
coming before the proof of being able to kind of drive that, and sort of the gas on the fire. It was almost like the gas was going on nothing. Now it's like, you know, those that have kind of taken a little more patient approach, the patient approach being,
That's the word.
let's develop it first. Let's develop that sort of ability to drive growth, the right metrics to kind of like, you know, have fundamental sort of understanding of, to your point, what is the actual, you know, TAM? What is the actual addressable market? What can we reasonably expect to get from it? And let me prove to you how it is that we can, you know,
chip into it
and create momentum within it. Yeah.
So the money, the money has to come before the proof, right? Because you have to be able to invest and go ahead and target and develop this market and move from the, you know, the clicks to the conversions to the sales conversions. But there has to be a lot more strategy that goes into that, so that when you are making that investment, whether it's a marketing team that's being asked for this or a CEO who's going out to get funding, I think there's going to be a lot more scrutiny in saying, well, do you really know who your market is? Do you really have all the right processes in place? And do you have the tools to be able to go ahead and measure this, so that when you are making this investment, I want to be able to see all along that journey how you're succeeding. And then if you're not succeeding, you also have the tools to be able to pivot and make changes.
So the other side to that point, and this sort of ties Chris's thought together with yours, is I think patience is a really interesting term, because there's another side of patience too, whereby I think the well-funded companies that still have lots of cash, they're still going to be able to go do things. But I think the rope, the leash, or the patience to see results is a lot less. So they can still throw their weight around respectively. But, you know, in this whole concept of, the promise of growth, now the patience of growth is cut in half. You better have the right strategy, to your point. You better have the ways to pull in a lead into a meaningful sales conversation to show there's at least signs of potential for revenue. I think that's the biggest thing, is now your window to show you know what you're doing is a lot less.
Yes.
And then
Yeah.
the willingness to invest, if we don't absolutely know for sure it's working, is next to zero.
Yeah, and I think your you know, marketing teams were probably stressed out already. You know what I mean?
Probably, yeah.
You know, so now we're saying on top of that, you know, we need to
Do more with less.
Yeah, and you do more with less, exactly. So now we're asking you to do more with less. And I think that's where I think it's so interesting to have this reset in some for some of these teams to really be able to come back down, like you said, back down to reality a bit, because it's not, they haven't been living in that world. You know, they've been living in a world where they've had more money to spend, and we've had, you know, people that have taken jobs that we know of that, you know, were sold one thing. You know, you're going to have all this money to spend, and then, you know, 3 or 4 months in, now that the economy's changed, they call us back up and like, actually, it turns out that we don't have that money to spend, and we're pivoting here. So like, it's real, and it's tough. I mean, we know how difficult it is. We got started in this game before it was crazy, before there was so much money being thrown around. But certainly, if you've been growing up in marketing, maybe even in tech, over the last 8 years.
Well, I was going to say, can you imagine you're a strong marketer who kind of came into your career at the right time, and you've been in tech marketing or high growth industries for call it 10 years.
Probably bounced around a few times.
You've probably moved up the ladder. You're a director, maybe you're a VP, and all you've kind of seen is this.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden now you're seeing it, and by the way, the worst is probably to come.
Yeah.
Like, that's a real 180.
Yeah.
But now, we can sit here and say doom and gloom, but I think one of the, if you're going glass half full, will be it's the opportunity to sort of scale back a bit and get back to basics. Because I think at some point, sort of a bit of a reset, it might actually be a healthy thing long term for how you think about engaging your audience. What are the tactics and strategies you think you need to make a meaningful dent with your target audience? Like, it's not all bad if you're willing to adjust.
It's just more challenging. So those marketers who have had that success, there'll be those who have kind of, coasted because the marketer, the environment allowed them to do that, as opposed to those who were maybe a little bit more strategic about what they were doing. So those are the marketers that are going to be more successful in this new adversity, because they will take a step back and they'll say, okay, who's my audience? What are my strategies? What am I willing to invest? Let's go ahead and move through this logically and be conscious of what I'm investing and what I'm getting as a return.
So we've got, right. There's a really interesting dynamic we're going to see play out where there's never been this degree of competition in almost any industry or sort of solution category. Name anything and there's viable competition across the board. And on top of that, now we're saying the ability to differentiate through, in some cases, greater funding or more ability to try and test things is in part being taken out. What it's actually going to force is real true differentiation on whether it's messaging, positioning, strategy. So out of this, potentially, we're going to see some really creative approaches at the basic level.
Yeah, I agree.
To how people and organizations are actually going to separate from an increasingly crowded, competitive environment. I think it's actually kind of cool. It's going to be hard, though. That's glass half full. glass empty, half empty is things are going to get difficult.
Yeah. Well.
Yeah, and you're going to hate marketing because you realize that it's hard.
Well, it's like, I mean, I'm going to make a hockey. I'm going to make a hockey comparison.
I think it's
here.
okay. It's
Do you
okay
remember?
with our audience.
Remember when suddenly there was like a market cap, and all of a sudden, like it was like an evening of the playing field. So now you had to be really good at
salary cap,
recruiting. You had to be really good at actually executing.
Parity. You're right. Yeah.
Parity. And so instead of having the Dallas well, obviously I'm mixing metaphors here. The Dallas Cowboys, or back in the day,
any of the
Toronto
New York
Maple Leafs,
teams who had all the budget,
New York,
right?
Yeah. Glenn Sather. Anyways, the guys that were just throwing money at at players to win championships. Well, now it's like you actually have to be able to produce, this is our new era.
Betters the game.
Yeah.
Right? Betters the game.
Yeah.
Right?
It does better the game.
It makes accountability.
Now, as a marketer, you're actually going to be, needing to actually prove that differentiation rather than just being able to kind of throw more cash at it.
But I like that.
Good analogy, Chris.
I think
Thank
marketing,
you. Thanks,
with the emergence of MarTech and marketing technologies, I think some of the basics or the principles of marketing, being creative and trying to understand what you're trying to sell, who you're selling to, has kind of gone by the wayside in favor of, well, we have technology and I'm really good at technology, and technology isn't the means. It isn't the answer itself. It's a means to actually go and communicate with an audience, but that's not the strategy, as we've long said. And I think we've kind of lost sight of the art of creativity and positioning and everything that's kind of not really changed about marketing. We've just kind of prioritized the tech, which has a place, but it's not the only thing.
Well, I think of everything I saw on the collision floor in the last couple of days. These were all technology tools or apps to improve sort of the execution, let's say, or the delivery. but there was not like anyone was coming up and saying, well, actually, we're telling you to do your strategy totally different. Meaning that it's still, it is back to the basics, because if you don't have that right strategy, that audience definition, that clear understanding of your product value and differentiation, none of these amazing apps are going to help you succeed.
Right. I'm sorry that you just reminded me. There was this Dave Gerhardt thing on LinkedIn. It was so good the other day, where he's like, stop using the following words, and it was like optimized, seamless, streamlined.
Oh no!
And it's like, but all these tech companies, like,
are we gonna get burnt every time we say one of those
this
words?
jumble of like, we optimize the streamlined communication abilities in this
Yeah.
platform. Like,
Yeah.
I don't know what that means. So it's gonna actually force real descriptions of what you do. Like, it was a really funny post he had. I had to mention that.
Yeah.
But I think what you were saying earlier is that, you know, the growth was being driven by these valuations, and then the promise of future revenue, right? So then you raise money, and then there's like the calculation that's used, right? Okay, so we're going to need to be a 50 million ARR organization, right?
Yeah.
So then you're going back to okay, I guess our TAM is that big, and I guess, do some high level math, and I guess we can sell that many companies, and then they're off and they're trying to do marketing to grow the funnel. And in a lot of cases, you don't get anywhere close to that, right? You come out with 5 million in revenue, and now we're seeing a lot of companies that are merging and, kind of being acquired, or that type of concept, right?
Yeah.
But I just think that that's sort of the reality, I think, of a lot of marketers when they get started, is that, unless you've got something special, you're probably going to be through a 5 to 8 to 10 year slog of building your brand, building real traction around concise messaging, and
In heavy competitive environments.
right, and you're going to be closing deals, and you're going to grow that, but it's not going to be that hockey stick or that V curve or that K curve type of growth that, when you raise 20 million and everybody thought you'd be at 5 million in ARR in 6 years. No, that's not happening.
Yeah.
Right.
There will be the odd outlier who will still have that explosive growth. And I think because of all the valuation metrics have really come down as well, it's going to really put those companies who achieve that kind of wild growth on totally different multiples, because that really is standout and impressive to that point.
Good.
Right?
To that end, do we have a sales call or no? I can't remember.
We do.
The proof
But
of revenue.
is that in half an hour? Or
I've lost it. Harsh, what time is it?
it's 2:00.
Yeah, 2:30.
Oh, okay.
We've got
we've
a few
time.
more minutes.
We've got time.
Some of us do.
See, we're always aligned. Do you have
except
a
for
meeting?
Rob.
At 2, yeah.
Okay, well, there you go. 25 minutes, I think that's pretty good.
I think it's pretty good.
If there's no value here, guys,
I think there's
Lo-
always
you know,
value, except for the last
leave a
90
comment.
seconds
Leave a
now.
comment, right?
So what's the key takeaway? I think it's like getting, even if your company hasn't felt the strain or the impact yet.
Which is surprising, right? Because
But if it hasn't,
right, yeah. So
And if
you
they haven't,
yet,
I'm sure you're thinking about it.
you're thinking
But
about it
it's-
because you can't ignore what you see out there.
You should be thinking about
Yeah.
what are my scale back tactics and what are the
Yeah.
things that really matter.
Yeah.
And it may not be that little tech thing. Maybe it's more of a let's reroute back into basics. Talk to your customers and your key ICPs.
Yeah.
Understand what would separate you or how they interpret your services or solutions. And then start building outwards again from logical, defensible marketing spends. That's what I would start with.
And look at your the marketing initiatives you have in place now. Understand how your marketing and sales teams are working together. Because if they're not, that's a huge gap. That's something internal that you can focus on, so that as you are readjusting or scaling, at the very least, you're going to have that full visibility and be able to answer those questions about, how much I'm investing, how much am I getting as a return, because that ROI is going to be even more important.
And I think creative. I think that's something you brought up, right? I mean, I think going back to, it sort of touches on the messaging concept that you already brought up, which is, really about not just regurgitating the same 3 words that everybody else is using, but I also think the creative thing is a good call out. We see this a lot too, people that are either maybe early stages of their marketing career, or, they've grown up in the automation tools. They've been in a lot of this. They kind of sort of like forget about that, the look and feel and the creative, and that's a whole package. And that goes a long way. I mean, we've seen it with some of our stuff. It can just make a huge difference if you can connect on that. Mm-hmm. So that's right. That'd be another focus area.
Yeah.
Well, good news is we're not venture backed.
Yep.
So
that's true.
The cash is not running out anytime soon because there is no cash.
The leveling of the playing field.
Yeah. I'm not sure we want to say that on our podcast.
We don't.
We're never afraid of an ROI
we have sustainable marketing programs here at Goose Digital.
I think that's a good thing to say. I think the previous one, Harsh is going to have a lot of things to, I think, edit out here.
Yeah. There's no third party cash fueling us.
Right.
Yeah, I think being able to look at what it actually takes to get traction in any market. We have experience in the platforms, both the channels as well as the marketing automation and CRM platforms. With history, we can sort of help understand how to keep from needing to overspend in order to get into an audience. And so we do it ourselves. And that's what I think makes us a little bit different than than a lot of folks that are sort of coming out into the marketplace with a whole lot of we need to be profitable every quarter. So and that's what we are looking to help our customers do the same.
All right. Okay. Well, thanks everyone.
Cool.
Thanks
that
everyone.
Was fun.
All right. It was fun.
Bye.
Bye.